Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Angelique, as was mentioned, and I'm so excited to be here to share with you. As you heard in my bio, it's great to hear things said about you. It's interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later on when we talk about your resume, because that's your marketing tool to others. But I've been in the HR space for over 15 years, and I've had some experiences that I think would be really valuable to others as they're trying to navigate their career advancement. So, thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with me, and let's jump right in. Okay, so there's a disclaimer here. So the info provided by the HR resource as well as the clinic is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as employment advice. So we advise you to seek out individual employment advice, and it is recommended that attendees consult with their own HR professionals for advice. So this is really just our information, sharing it with you, but if you want very specific information, seek out legal counsel, seek out HR individuals as you chart and navigate your own career path. We already went through that. Okie dokie. So let's get started. Today we're going to review the workshop goals, determine is it time to look for a new job, figure out how to become self-aware as you're on that journey. Then we're going to look at how to drive your career, and then how to put it into action. So I am not ignorant to the fact that we're all here at different stages in our career. Perhaps some people are looking to switch to another field. Perhaps people are in a role that they've been in for some time and they're trying to figure out, is it the right time to move? How can I advance? Or perhaps you're a job seeker now hitting the market and you're trying to figure out, how do I land the role? This table of contents is going to walk you through all that you need to know for the varying aspects that we might all be in. So pay attention, listen up. It may not be exclusively relevant to you in the right now, or you may be preparing to be a part of either one of those different areas, but there is something for everyone. So first up is the workshop goals. So we want to equip you with the ability to recognize indicators to signal whether or not it's time for a change in your employment. The next thing is that we want to guide you through exercises aimed at identifying your core competencies and needs areas of development. So we're doing that through this worksheet here that's provided to everyone. So take a look at it. There's a lot of white space. There are opportunities to participate and self-reflect. That's what that bullet point is about. We are going to identify essential skills, as mentioned before. We're going to educate you on effective techniques for updating and tailoring your resume and cover letters. We'll highlight the significance of personal branding. We'll look at developing a strategic career plan, as well as creating a detailed action plan for career next steps. Lastly, we want to empower you to feel confident and make well-informed decisions about your career progression. So, are you feeling stuck in your current job? Are you struggling to find the motivation? We all know that every job has its ups and downs. But for you, lately you've been feeling like it's mostly comprised of downs, right? So you think to yourself, like, I used to enjoy this job, but now you're not sure if this is what you want to do for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Is it just a slump? You're not sure, you know? We all find ourselves in this situation. Determining whether it's time to stay or leave your job is a very, very personal decision, and it's not always a clear-cut one. We are going to look at 5 signs of when it may be time to consider a new role, and when it may be not time to look for a new role. Those are less compelling reasons to look for a new role. But before we do that, we're going to look at this first example here. So Mariah has a decade of experience at her current company. However, she's hit a ceiling, so there's no longer opportunities for her to move up. Mariah has bigger dreams for her career, but she feels like it's too late to start over at a new job. She knows the application process can be daunting, it's a big hassle, and it sounds too difficult to figure out how to integrate with a new team or community. So instead, she settles for what she has and she stays quiet, and she slowly by slowly every day resents the job that she's in. Years pass by and Mariah grows more complacent, and dissatisfied. Right? Here's another example of someone else. It's been a rough year since Ben's current employer hired him. He's new to the field, there was a steep learning curve, and he's fed up with working long hours and feels like he's not advancing and not advancing fast enough in terms of where he thought he would be. His boss gives him some constructive criticism on his work, and he absolutely loses it. He quits on the spot, he makes a scene, and he tells off his boss. Right? It felt good in the moment, but now Ben is back in the job market, and he's realized that there aren't many better opportunities for someone at his experience level. A few months pass by, and Ben still isn't getting any hits. Maybe his old job wasn't so bad after all. Now, I'm hoping that nobody has done what Ben has done. Telling off your boss and quitting on the spot is quite an emotional reaction, but if you have done that, it's okay. There's room to come back for it. We all slip up and lose our minds a little bit sometimes. I know I have been there. Some of my friends are in this room. They've got calls from me before, like, I'm going to walk out, right? We've been there. So it's essential that you leave or you stay with your job for the right reasons. In both of these examples, we have people who are choosing to stay or people who are choosing to leave, and from my point of view, they don't have valid reasons. So let's take a look at some really good reasons that you should consider finding a new job. So you want to advance in your career. If you want to advance, it may be a good idea to look for a new job if that's the best way to advance. For example, you may reach a place where you've developed as much as you can, or perhaps there's no room left for growth at your current company, or you may find that there are better opportunities that align with your long-term career goals elsewhere. Checkmark, absolutely a good reason to look for a new job. You might also consider leaving your job if it doesn't align with your skills, your interests, or your values, or if your team or your company isn't a good fit for you culturally, personally, and ethically. I was dealing with someone a few weeks ago. He was interviewing with me at my company, and I said, "Why are you looking for a new job?" And he said, "Well, a few years ago, the cannabis industry was booming, and there were all these opportunities, and so I took it. But upon reflection, I'm not a cannabis user, and I don't think it aligns with who I am." For him, that was a big conflict. And so you have to think about these things, the industry that you're in. I also have another friend who works for a major company, I won't say which one, but it's in adult films. For some, that may be a conflict of interest. For others, it may not be an issue at all. So just think about the roles that you're applying. Not everything has to be for everyone. Get in where you fit in. Another reason to look for a new job is you dread going to work every day. So it's interesting how this is worded because I think we all feel like that at some point. But what the essence of this point is, the stress at work is overwhelming. That's when you need to take a closer look at whether or not you need to stay at your job. Warning signs include you have trouble sleeping, you're eating too much or too little, you have gastrointestinal issues. We all know that stress can affect our health, right? So we have to be mindful of that. It's also a red flag if you start using alcohol or any kind of drug to deal or cope with the the stress related with work. So if you have to find a coping mechanism in order to handle the day by day, that's a strong indicator that it's time to go. And then lastly here, you work in a hostile or toxic environment. For example, you want to start sending out applications immediately if you witness anything that's unethical, or if you experience bullying or harassment or abuse at all. Pay attention to the way that you describe work to your family and friends as well. If complaints and negative talk seem to dominate all of your conversations, then you probably are starting to get the hint that this just isn't working out. In contrast, I want to highlight some less compelling reasons to find a new job. So you have a bad day or a couple of bad days. No job is going to be perfect, as we said before, and you'll have both good and bad days and everything in between. And it's normal for some people to feel less or more excited about work. But I don't think that that's a reason that you should call it a quits. Another less compelling reason is you haven't explored internal opportunities. Have you looked around at what might be available to you within your company? So whether it's at your role or in another department, like, don't walk out the door without taking advantage of everything that you have within your reach. Something I like to tell people all the time is, okay, you're unhappy at your job and you're ready to go, that's great, but did you take them for everything that they have? Are you utilizing everything that is within your reach? I'm talking everything, especially employer paid benefits. Go for your massages once a week. Take advantage of their pension, like maximize it before you walk out the door. You have to think smart, right? So really, really, really look around you. And that also goes for jobs. Like, okay, your department isn't working, you're not clicking or gelling with your team. Is there another department or another area of your work that you can learn or take on or transfer to that might make working at your current employer okay and maybe even fulfilling? Another reason that I do not find is quite compelling enough to leave is you experience a setback. It happens to everyone. Like, life is not without issues or challenges. And so if you get into a disagreement with your manager, if you and your coworker get into a squabble, if you get some feedback on a presentation you're doing, it's all a part of the game. A setback doesn't mean that you're out of the game. It just means that you need to take it in, assess it, determine what you can learn from it, and then make a decision as to whether or not it warrants you to stay or go. Chances are, if you think out 2 or 3 months, that setback is not ultimately going to set you back in your career. It was in the moment. And then last, you're impatient. We live in a world where we want everything now. If you press your phone twice and that app doesn't open up, you're ready to toss it across the room, right? That's not how things happen in real life. We're living like a microwave world. 10 seconds and it's hot. It's almost like it was like freshly baked. You have to give things time. I'm by no means telling you to stay in an environment where you are under duress, under like immense amounts of stress or being abused, none of that. But don't be impatient. Give it time. And if you're not an optimist, think about it like this. Give them an opportunity to fail you. Don't just assume that they will. Okay, one call out here, and I have to do this because I have to be real. You might need to check yourself. Real talk, right? You have to say, is it me or is it the job? Like, for example, if you're having trouble getting along with several coworkers, the common denominator just might be yourself. And in this case, it makes more sense for you to work on your communication and your interpersonal skills before blaming it on someone else. It's hard to do. I've had to do it. It takes a lot to keep your head held high and do it, but you have to look inside you, because if you do leave and you find another job, you might find yourself back in the same situation. All right, we're going to check in and see what you understand or have learned so far. So Nicole here, I love the picture. She has locks just like me. Chica is holding a nice folder. I do that all the time. She's looking for, should she find a new job? So she's a young professional who's coming to you for your career advice. Should she stick it out or should she leave? Lately, my work has been feeling repetitive and dull. I feel stagnant, like I'm not making any progress. Like my talents are just not being used. I'm underutilized. I'm not reaching my full potential. What should I do? So option one is, okay. Option one is, it sounds like you're seeking a new challenge and want to grow your career. Perhaps you should consider a new job. That's one potential type of feedback or response you can give to her. The other option is, well, have you tried talking to your manager about it? There may be opportunities for more challenging work. Any comments? What advice would we give to Nicole? Number two, all right. Yeah, certainly. Number two allows her to get feedback, more insight, more intel before she makes her decision. It's not that number one is a bad answer or bad recommendation to her. It's just that you want to have all the info before you make a decision. So talking to the manager is strategy. If your manager responds to you and is like, yeah, head office is really ridiculous, I don't know what's going on, I'm looking for a new job too, then that reaffirms that this may not be the right spot. But if you don't utilize all the resources within your reach, which is your manager that you're squeezing info from, you're not going to know if you're making a wise decision or not. And number 2 may help you get to number 1. So it's just the way that you think about things. Here's another example. It's been 6 months and I'm still not satisfied with the options my manager has come up with. So she had the conversation, her manager gave her some feedback. The opportunities available don't align with the skills I want to use and learn. So now what? So again, she's coming to you for advice. What do you say? You can use option number 1. It sounds like you've just outgrown your job and it's just no longer a good fit. Okay, now's the time to get looking. Or be patient, girl. Nicole, hang in there. Keep looking for those internal opportunities and don't make a rash decision that you'll regret. What are we thinking? Number 2? Okay. So number 2, yes, that sounds like what we need to be doing based on what we've described. But how long do we wait? How long do we wait? It's been 6 months since she had the conversation. And these feelings don't come up overnight, which means that she's probably been feeling this way for probably 6 months before. So now we have a whole year that we've invested. We have another comment in the back.
So you give yourself a set amount of time so that you don't make a rash decision. So in this case right here, you have issues with the job. You then speak the grievances to your superior and tell them, hey, this is what I want to do. They try to work with you, but it's still not around what you think is best for your skills. I guess 1 could be an option. Also, it can't be that bad because you actually said something. But do you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to give this a month or something, and then at that point, if something doesn't change, then you pull the trigger? Is that something that would make more sense?
That's a good question. The challenge is that there's no right or wrong answer. And I can't give you a definitive timeline. There are lots of factors that come into deciding whether or not you're going to stay in a role or wait for something to turn around. If you stay in something long enough, it likely will turn around. What goes up must go down. What goes down will eventually go up, like the stock market, right? So potentially, I think you have to look at the things in your life that are happening. Are you driven by finances and needing to put food on the table for other people that are dependent on you? Are you driven by advancement because you have an ultimate goal that you want to get to, and this role is a strategic step in getting there? You have to look at the information that you have access to, talking to your manager, maybe another colleague in another department, maybe someone who's outside of your company that might have insight into the industry and what's happening, so you can kind of forecast what's going to happen, right? Like, for instance, I'll go back to the cannabis industry. It was like the hottest thing some years ago. I know people that jumped ship in roles that they had been in for so long to go to the cannabis industry. And they showed up and they did great. But what are we seeing with all these cannabis stores? They're on every street corner and a lot of them are closing down, right? For a number of reasons, it didn't have the longevity, or hasn't proven it in the right now to have the longevity that was expected, right? So it's never really clear cut. It's a very personal decision. So for me in this particular situation, after a conversation, after 6 months of conversation, I think at that point you start to strategize. How much longer can I stay in this role? If I stay another 6 months, what is it going to do to my mental health? What is it going to do to my finances if that's the biggest driver? What is it going to do to me getting me closer to my goal? Do I have 6 months again? Do I have another month? What is your driver, right? So it's going to be a very, very personal decision. But thank you for the feedback. I hope that answers your question, but it really depends. And it has to be specific to each individual, because my drivers are not going to be the same as yours. And yours aren't going to be the same as hers, right? Now, one quick call out. If you do decide to leave your role, that's great. Like, I'm happy for you, but I want you to remember that you're always playing chess, not checkers, right? So you have to be mindful that you need to stay on good terms. Do the nods, do all the niceties, the gracious stuff, because ultimately you want to stay on good terms and continue to have that bridge. You never know when you're going to need to cross it or refer to it. So be mindful, play chess, not checkers, and ensure that you keep that relationship as positive as possible and the transition out as smooth. Any comments or questions from anyone? Okay. We're going to move on to the next section, which is talking about what career development is. So at the beginning, I talked about the different paths that we might all be on. And so let's look at career development a little bit now. So career development is a lifelong journey of self-recognition and professional improvement. It begins with understanding who you are and choosing a career path that aligns with your strengths, interests, and values. Then it's about setting SMART goals, and we'll talk about what that means in a little while, and creating a plan and putting that plan into action. When followed, a career development process lets you cultivate career skills, knowledge, and experience. And it's ever changing. So your career development will likely change as life happens, continuing to evolve as you move through different aspects of your life. Career development is about you as an individual. Your development is linked to your happiness. So it's something that you must determine and create and actively work on, because the only person who owns your career path is you. You may already know this, but I'm going to remind you, your manager owes you nothing. Your job owes you nothing. Their loyalty is to themselves. And so it may sound harsh, but it's a reality that you have to keep top of mind as you think about your career progression, advancement, and development. The only person that's going to play chess for your career is you, because they're charting their own and they have their own motivators. So when you take the time to think through what you want and how you plan on getting there, you reap long-term rewards. Specifically, the career development process helps you get direction. So instead of kind of just going around like the lazy river kind of approach to career development, your process offers you a roadmap and it puts you in the driver's seat. When you focus on career development, you increase your motivation. So by setting professional goals, you'll take your aspirations out of the idea stage and move them into a realistic stage. It's a powerful, motivating tool that gives you an inspiring endpoint, right? And it promotes discipline and growth. So as I said, no one is more invested in your future than you. It gives you a series of defined steps and encourages you to develop a strong, purpose-driven discipline. And last, it boosts your professional fulfillment. By following the career development process, you'll make sure that you're not just working hard, but you're also working towards the right end goal. And that ownership of the goal will bring you, hopefully, fulfillment and happiness, because you invest so many hours in your job, and we all want to feel fulfilled and happy. So again, to recap, career development is all about you. It's linked to your happiness, so it's something that you must determine and create and actively work towards. At the foundation of career development is self-awareness. So before you can choose a path that you want to go down, you have to first understand what makes you tick. This is the whole part about looking in the mirror and trying to understand what your drivers are, what's important to you. You're unique, so what drives your need to succeed will also be unique. It's in the talents that you have and in the passions that you hold. It's individual. So to kick off your development journey, let's take a few minutes and pause as we talk about your individuality. So what are your strengths? Just give me 1 second here. So to figure that out, you answer questions like, what do I know? What do I know? What are the things that I know? Do I know a lot about cars? Do I know a lot about trees? Do I know a lot about babies? Do I know a lot about emotional intelligence? Do I have a great sense? Like, what do I know a lot about? Another question you can ask yourself is like, what do I complete very quickly? Maybe I'm like skilled at mental math. So maybe like my friends say something and I can do the calculation really quickly. Or maybe I can look at something and eyeball it and say, that's about 6 centimeters high. Like, what comes to you naturally? Another thing to consider is, what distinguishes me from my peers? So in a room with people, how do I stand out? When do I feel most effective? When do I feel like I'm utilizing all the things that I have in me, right? So if I work with my hands and someone comes over to my house and they're like, man, my car's been acting up, and I go outside and I lift up the hood and I can figure it out, like that effective, like I was able to do that. When do I feel that? What are your strengths and how do others see me? What's the feedback that you get? If you're working, the feedback that you get from your manager. If you're not working, maybe the feedback you get from your community. Do people look up to you? Do people rely on you to organize or show up? What's the kind of feedback you get from your family? Are you the person that organizes all the events and has to plan the menu and who's bringing what and where are we going to meet up? Like, you have to understand where your strengths lie. And so we have our worksheet here, so I encourage everyone to kind of spend some time and think about it. I am going to give 3 minutes on the clock for us to kind of reflect, do some self-awareness exercises, and just jot down those notes. Okay. So, thoughts on the exercise. I heard some comments, but I'm going to ask people to share what they thought of their self-awareness exercise to identify what their strengths are. Yes?
I found it interesting. It was a bit challenging. I really have to reflect and think on things I do, whether it be work or in my personal relationships, how I can write it down and make it translate. So I do think I have to come back to this, but it's a good reflective tool.
Yeah. Anyone else?
That's the same. And I think we're so used to just kind of operating on autopilot a lot of the time. We don't really take the time to do some inventory on where we're at. So yeah, I think it's something that needs a little bit more time to really sit with it and answer the questions thoughtfully, because they are difficult questions to just come up with an answer on the fly, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting because the feedback is it's a little challenging to know what you're good at. But if I asked you to write down all the things you're not good at, I'm sure all of us would be able to do that a lot quicker than we were able to do this exercise, right? And so, yes, it's challenging to start looking at yourself that way and assessing yourself, but it's so important to recognize all the great things that we do. And realize that the more that you tell yourself or remind yourself of how good you are at these things, the more you'll start to believe it and it will come to your mind more naturally and you'll be able to tap into those things. The other thing I wanted to say is absolutely, it takes more time. Like, this is not something you're going to do in 4 seconds and just get it done. It's something that takes time. There was a call out that I wanted to share before we started this little exercise, but I think it's important to say now as well. I recognize that not everyone has the opportunity to align their careers with their strengths. Like, it's a privilege that we don't all share the same opportunity to be selective about the type of work that we have. So if your parents have migrated to a new country, they're likely not sitting down, and saying, what are my strengths today? I'm only gonna apply for jobs that allow me to highlight my strengths, right? Sometimes our decisions are based on our immediate needs or convenience. And I fully acknowledge the barriers and the frustration that one will face when they cannot match these two aspects of our wants and desires together. And at times we do what we can until we can do what we want to do. And that's the reality of life. So that's important to remember as you go through this. Okay, so let's move along. So that's not all in terms of self-reflection. So we looked at what are your strengths. Now we're looking at what are your interests. So beyond what you're capable of doing, what do you like to do? You might have an incredible voice, but if you have stage fright, then being a professional singer is not going to work for you. You need to find something that will really fulfill you despite being good at it. So to make sure your career is fulfilling, you should try and pursue those strengths that bring you joy. So not just looking at what am I good at, What do I like doing from that list of things that I'm good at? That way, you'll remain committed and actively engaged and love the work that you do, which will ultimately elevate your performance in it. So to identify your interests, consider the difference between I have to versus I want to. And your interests are tasks that you enjoy doing. So ask yourself, what activities give me the most satisfaction? To help you answer that question, we have more questions on your worksheet that you can fill out. So flip the page and look at the second page that's entitled Self-Awareness Part 1. Okay, that's values. So we'll stick on this page. So write down, what are your interests? What are those tasks that are your favorites? What are the values that you have, right? Jot them down. I'll give just a minute to do this. You might be exercised out so far, but we'll do 1 minute. As we continue to move forward, another aspect we have to consider are, what are your values? So I gave a few examples before of people who were in roles or with companies that didn't align with their values. And for some people, it wasn't an issue at all. They're pretty flexible because they have different motivators, right? So you need to think about this. The final piece of self-awareness involves understanding your core values. So your values are principles that give meaning to your career and to your life. They are things that you hold most dear to you, and they're typically defined by what's most important to you. Where do you want to live your life? How do you want to live your life? And what matters most in your career? Your values are highly personal. So they define who you are in your everyday life, and they may change as you move through different stages of life. So for example, as a new parent, you may value family time above all else. I can certainly identify with that. I've been working, I'm in my career, all is great, the pandemic happens, and boom, I have 2 babies out of the pandemic. My motivations change. Am I still very focused on ambition and career? Yes, but priority-wise, my value is my family. I now have a young family that I want to tend to, and for me, what's going to bring me most joy, what matters to me most, is being with them. So while I care about my career, I don't as much to stay past 6 o'clock, or 5 o'clock, I should say. My husband will beg to differ because I do stay late. But, I'm now getting back into the swing of things, but it depends on what stage you are in life. Or maybe it's that paycheck. Maybe it's you like living a certain lifestyle, you want to do certain things, and the almighty dollar is what's most important to you. So you're going to try to get that no matter what. You're staying till 8, you are coming in early, you are, doing everything you need to do to make sure you're recognized in advance. Perhaps that is what your value is rooted in. Your values are like a compass. So how do you define your values? When you understand your values and you align them with your career path, your choices will likely bring you joy. So you need to hold your values close. When you have situations like, should I accept this job? Or what role should I pursue? If you understand your values, you can kind of navigate those questions a little bit easier. How do you define your values, you ask? Another worksheet. I'm joking. No, but it is there, but you don't have to do it right now. It is absolutely there for you to do at a later time. But the way you do that is you consider, in terms of experiencing pride, happiness, and fulfillment. Let's talk about these buckets quickly. So for pride, first recognize what makes you feel prideful, right? That will help you understand what achievements you value. For example, some people are most proud of their individual accomplishments. I did this. I was able to climb Mount Everest. I was able to graduate at the top of my class. While other people feel like, myself and my group, I created this run club, or I created this program in my community that's giving back. How are you driven? What's the value for you? Is it individual? Is it team-based? Then consider your happiness. When do you feel most happy? Think about moments in the recent past and in the future, what would make you happy in your role? Is it that you're sitting in front of a computer and you've got a bunch of spreadsheets and you're able to answer questions? Or is it that you're talking in a setting like this and you're interacting with people on a day-to-day? These things matter. And then fulfillment, right? Unlike happiness, which can be short-lived, fulfillment is deeper. Like, think about anything that you like. I don't know if you guys will agree with this example, but like, for me, Chinese food never really fulfills me for very long. It meets the need and it makes me happy and it's so great going down, but afterwards, that food, it didn't fulfill me, right? But on the other hand, a slice of cheesecake, which doesn't have all the nutrients, that fulfills me. That gives me what I need, right? That might sound crazy to you, but for me, that's my preference. And that's how career development, career advancement, and fulfillment and pride and happiness is for everyone. We all have different palettes. We all have different drivers. We all have things that fulfill us, right? So if you understand that about yourself, it will certainly enable you to move forward feeling confidently, knowing how to progress. So, moving forward on how to progress, driving your career. So before you can progress, like we've done all the work that you need to do, you need to understand what are the options that are available. Before we get into this lesson, let's go and look at some myths that are here. True or false? You can climb the corporate ladder to advance your career. Or you must climb the corporate ladder to advance your career. Do we think this is true or false?
False.
Oh, we're split. Okay. Interesting. Let's look at the other one. You might move vertically, right? Vertically, laterally, or even take a step back and advance your career. Do we think that's true or false? Frustrating but true. Interesting. Okie dokie. So the first statement, you must climb the corporate ladder to advance your career, is actually false. Advancement looks different for everyone. And there are different ways to get to your end goal. That's the goal, to achieve your career goals. And it's not the same for everyone. And it doesn't always mean that you need to climb a ladder and go up this way. The second statement, you might have to move vertically, which is going up, laterally, which is going across at the same level or operating on the same sphere, or take a step back, is absolutely true to advance your career. So I have notes here, but I'm going to go off topic a little bit. If your ultimate career goal is to be, I don't know, a lawyer, and you're currently working in accounting, like, how do you make that happen? Is becoming a CFO of a company, overseeing the financial department, going to get you closer to being a lawyer? Maybe in order to advance your career, you've got to take a step back. Let's use another example. You work a full-time job, you really like it, but you have a different passion. You want to be an entrepreneur. So getting promoted at your role is not going to bring you closer to being an entrepreneur. And so yes, you make a decent salary, you don't want to step away from your role because perhaps you need the income to support people that rely on you. And so you're trying to figure out, how do you advance your ultimate career, because a career is different than a job. How do you advance your career? And it may be that you need to move back. Maybe you need to start looking for opportunities in your community that you can be an entrepreneur. Maybe you need to not worry about advancing the career at your job, but you need to look at how you can get closer to your goal. Who can I talk to? Who can I learn from? What resources are available online? What can I take advantage of? Perhaps it's investing in school. I think school is great, but I think it has a place. If it's not going to advance your ultimate goal, it makes no sense. Don't do an MBA because it sounds great. It's a lot of money and a lot of time. Is it going to get you to your goal? If it's not, then don't bother, right? Going back to school, I'm going back to school. Is that going to get you to your goal? Perhaps it is. Maybe it's not a degree. Maybe it's a certificate. And maybe that certificate will get you closer to your goal. You really have to realize, like, don't forget, you are playing chess. You're not playing checkers. It's all about strategy. So I'll just say, you know, when many of us think about career growth or career advancement, we imagine a traditional corporate ladder where employees advance upwards following a predetermined path, right? the path is usually linear, but that's not the only way you can advance. Career paths are more like climbing walls or like scaling walls in a corporate ladder. So there are multiple directions you can take and different moves that you make to help you reach your career goals, because that ultimately is the goal. So let's look at it a little bit more. So more ways that you can grow. So we talked about these already. So moving laterally, so maybe you're happy in your career and you're just gonna stay within this sphere and just continue to do well. Perhaps that works for you. Some examples of that include developing or advancing your current skills, increasing your business or industry understanding. You know, that's stuff that you can do with moving laterally. Motivating and mentoring others, that's still advancement in your career. Then vertically, right? We know that. That's the traditional way. So taking on more responsibility, getting a promotion, advancing leadership and managing people, all of those things, great. Or you may find that your current position and direction in terms of your goals are misaligned with your career. Then you may want to take a step back and reassess. For example, you might find that I actually don't like managing people. I've got to this point in my job and it's not what I thought it was going to be. I prefer to work on my own. I prefer to do something totally different. And so you realize that you prefer to be an individual contributor. And that's a new term, but we'll talk about it later on in the presentation. So regardless of which direction you take, whether it's traveling vertically, laterally, or taking a step back, eventually you'll probably come to a fork in the road, right? And then you're asked, do I want to continue on as an individual contributor or be a manager? And so you may or may not know the difference between the two, but both of them are forms of career advancement. So as an individual contributor, you're someone who works independently and you take ownership of your success, right? So you evaluate your progress and you aim to improve your own skills, your own knowledge, your own abilities. As a manager on the other end, you're passionate about developing a team. So maybe you have high influence and persuasive skills. That can be a natural trait where people like listening to you or they enjoy speaking with you, right? So maybe you capitalize on that strength and you move people forward in their careers. You're able to develop them, and then you feel ownership over the team's overall success. So in every role, whether you're working in corporate, whether you're working in community, whether you're working in education or financial services, there are these two buckets that people find themselves in. And both of them can be equally successful. Both of them can be very senior individuals. There's no one up over the other, but in order for any company or business to be successful, you're going to need people who manage people, who lead them, and then people who manage processes, who deal with individual success, people who are subject matter experts, and those people typically fall into the individual contributor bucket. Any questions on that?
I actually have a question. Can you give an example of like the title of an individual contributor?
Yeah, certainly. So an individual contributor, like we said, you work independently and you take ownership of their success. So I work in the real estate field and we have development assets. And so an individual contributor might be a manager of development. This person is in charge of looking at our pipeline and identifying opportunities for us to create more income, to create more housing, to create more capital, to get more ownership of land. And so they're looking at the strategy behind it, but they're not leading a team. So this manager is at a manager level, manager in terms of managing a process or overseeing a project, but they're an individual contributor versus someone who may have a more traditionally junior title and may be a senior accountant that oversees 2 accountant level employees. So they're managing people in their role, and they're looking at team success. Can we create the financial statements that are required on this monthly basis? Can we meet these filing obligations? So I don't want you to get confused with the word manager and think that that means you're always managing people. You can manage processes. So you can be a manager in title and be an individual contributor. You can be a vice president and be an individual contributor because you don't necessarily have a team underneath you. The manager means leadership, people leadership. And so that's the fork in the road that you're going to be. If you are working at a grocery store, for instance, perhaps you're a cashier. So you're an individual contributor. You have very specific things that you need to do. Or perhaps you're the floor manager and you're managing individual people, one of which are the cashiers, right? There are different pathways that you can take. Or maybe you're the area supervisor and you don't have any people reporting to you, but you're an individual contributor, but you're in charge of looking at how well all of these grocery stores are doing, right? You have a specific task. Does that help clarify it a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else before we move on from this? All right, we have another exercise here. One more, so just a question. So we're looking at Keon. We need to check everything that we've talked about so far. And, Keon is our coworker. He wants to apply what he's learned to help him navigate his career path and opportunities. So let's look at this. Keon works in customer support. He likes his job, but he's also craving a challenge. He's not sure where to start or what kind of challenge he wants. So what should he do? Option 1, see if there are any internal opportunities to match his experience. Option 2, approach his manager to ask about promotional opportunities. Or option 3, schedule a one-on-one with his manager to talk about how he's feeling and assess his strengths, interests, and values all at once. What do we think?
I think it sounds great.
Yeah, anyone else? Yeah, for sure. It's funny because I did have one, I kind of prioritized one over the other, but I think you're right. All three are going to be important for him to do because, again, we talked about getting the most information we can to make the most informed decision. Absolutely. He should be checking those job boards, like whatever they do. If they release them every Friday, or if there's a website, like check and see, is there anything that matches his experience? Talk to his manager about promotions. Hey, is anything coming down the pipeline? Even if there's not, I want to make you aware of the fact that I have interest and I have skill sets. And he knows he has skill sets because he's done his self-awareness assessment and he knows what he's good at. And he knows from the things that he's good at, what is it that he likes doing that he'd be willing to do at this job. And then scheduling a one-on-one to talk about how I'm feeling. Like, hey, I like working here, but I'm craving a challenge. And by doing that, he's letting his manager know, okay, there's a desire there. So when his manager gets something that lands on his desk or her desk that says, we need someone to lead a project, whether or not he's a manager already, managing people, he might say, well, Keon has expressed to me that he's craving a challenge. Maybe we can give it to him. And again, that's an opportunity of moving laterally. Like his pay is not changing. I will talk about that in a second. His pay is not changing necessarily. His title is not changing, but he's having an opportunity to meet that hunger and desire, that challenge that he's craving, based on him sharing it with his manager and his manager putting information to him that he wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, a quick call out, because I find this happens really often, and I think for me as a person of color, I tend to take it on as a part of, I'm doing so great, I should just do more and do more. Certainly, within your role, laterally, you can take on things, but there comes a point where you cannot do another job and not be compensated for it. So there's a fine line. That's not the focus of our discussion today, but just be mindful of that. You cannot absorb and absorb and absorb and not see any recognition, reward, and compensation for it. That's not how it works. Okay, so that concludes that section. Now we're going to talk about career vision. So at this point, hopefully, we've been thinking about our careers and how we want to advance them depending on the different starting points that we're at. And you should have some kind of a vague vision at least that's starting to come to fruition and starting to take shape. So you can see a general direction of maybe where you want to go that naturally aligns with your strengths, your interests, and your values. To bring clarity to that vision, you need to think about where you want to be in maybe 1, 3, or 5 years from now. What experience do you need to get there? And what skills do you want to develop? What knowledge do you need to acquire, right? So put aside what others want you to do, your mom, your dad, your sister, maybe your church family, like that's not important. You need to think about what success looks like at the highest level and how you can navigate there. That brings us to setting SMART goals. So SMART is an acronym, and it stands for specific, measurable, and attainable. Specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant, as well as time-bound. We'll go into what those mean on the next slide. It may seem a bit intimidating, but really it's just thinking strategically and working through what these goals mean. So setting goals. You need to set SMART goals to get you to where you want to be career-wise. So the S stands for specific. So is your goal specific and is it well-defined? To set a specific goal, you need to ask yourself, what do I really want to achieve? You want to get a job? Great. But what does it mean specifically? I want a job that allows me to have flexible hours because I have commitments outside of work. I want a job that allows me to utilize the things that I'm good at and the things I like doing. So they have to be specific. What does the achievement look like? Then it has to be measurable. Can you measure and track your goal? So avoid using words like, I want to be better at, or I want to do more of. Use specific words. I want to create. I want to be better at public speaking. That's an okay goal, but use words like, I want to create workshops where I can utilize my skill set of public speaking to the advantage of my goal, which will help me to gain experience and confidence in whatever the goal may be, right? Is it attainable? So if you set a goal and you can't realistically achieve it, then it makes no sense. It's pointless. The goal should be achievable within the resources, the knowledge, and the time that you have available. So if you're in a time crunch and you know that you have a big financial obligation that's coming up, you cannot set a goal by which you have to do 2 years of schooling in order to get to. It just doesn't make sense. If you have a goal that you need to meet, all of your action points need to be reasonable within the resources, the time, and the knowledge that you have access to. Relevant. Is the goal relevant to your broader career path and long-term goal? To set a relevant goal, ask yourself, why do I want to reach this goal? Do I think it's worthwhile? Will I be able to stay committed in the long run? Is it relevant? Again, under this section, we can talk about getting your MBA. Yes, it sounds great. Yes, it makes people think of you in a certain regard, but is it relevant to your goal? Perhaps you don't need it. So don't waste the time, energy, and money. And then time bound. Does your goal have a deadline? We talked about that a little bit before on measurable and attainable. Without a time frame or a target date, it's easy to procrastinate and get distracted. We all know that. I experienced that. It's like me saying I'm going to clean my closet whenever I get time. If I don't make an effort, it's likely not going to happen. So is there a time frame or target that you can put on top of your goal that will help you to actually achieve it? So here's an example of goal setting. So a vague goal is, I wanted to move into a management role. Again, when they're saying management, they're talking about managing people, overseeing people, leading groups, leading teams. A SMART version of that goal is, as someone who enjoys helping others, so that's the self-assessment piece there, you know what you enjoy, and developing projects, because you know you enjoy that, you like doing it, you want to do it. I want to become a director of engineering. That's super specific. That's an actual title. It's not just I want to be a doctor. I want to be this kind of doctor, right? For example, I want to become a director of engineering and have at least 4 direct reports. This person is very, very specific. I'd like to achieve this goal within 5 years. Perhaps it's doable. Who knows? But this person is pretty clear on what they want. And so if they read this every day, they're going to realize that they can't just, it's not just going to magically happen. This already informs that there's a lot of action that needs to take place. So consider vague, I want to move into a management role, and a SMART goal. Another way to think about this is communication. Think about with your family, or maybe with your partner or your spouse or whomever it may be. I'm not happy. Okay. A more direct, clear way of saying it, which kind of is an example of a SMART goal, is I'm not happy because I've experienced X. This is what I need. Like, the more crystal clear you can get on what your goal is, on what you're trying to communicate, on what you're trying to achieve, the better and the higher likelihood or chance of success you'll have. Has anyone used SMART goals before? Yeah? Okay. So, on your spreadsheet, we have a sheet that says SMART goals. There isn't any immediate activity, but it's something you need to think about. And we're going to go back to the spreadsheet in a second and we will review. So, perhaps you've chosen a goal and you're starting to kind of formulate a goal in your mind career-wise. Once you have that goal, it's time to break it down into smaller milestones or steps. How do you get to that point? No matter what you want to achieve, there are smaller checkpoints that you need to hit in order to get there. So, you want a new job? Okay, great. We're going to turn that into a SMART goal. I want a job that is in this field, that's going to allow me to do this and utilize this skill, and I'm not going to have any direct reports because I prefer to be an individual contributor. If that's your goal, how do you get there, right? An interesting quote that I heard is, do the difficult things while they're easy, and do the great things while they're small. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? So you break down that goal and you figure out how to get there. You do that, I'll go back a little bit. You figure out how to get there. So in your spreadsheets here, you've got your SMART goals defined in terms of how to start thinking about your goals. And at the bottom, you've got some space to figure out how to break it down. So depending on where you are in your career, let's say you're looking for a new role. If you want a job, you identify what that is, and then how do you get there? What do you have to do to achieve the above goal? You can fill that out on your own because it'll probably take some time to get you. So now you have a direction, now you have a SMART goal, now you have a vision of where you want to be and how to get there. Now you need to figure out, what are the requirements that I need? And as I just said, you're going to write them down on that spreadsheet. Those things that you wrote down on your spreadsheet, they become an action plan. And so perhaps you're going to need more education. Maybe you need to learn a specialized skill, right? Perhaps you're going to have to learn from experience, which means you're going to have to actually do on the job, sit and job shadow someone, or take on a special project or a goal. Maybe you're going to have to learn from your peers. So maybe it's coaching or mentoring or collaborating with others. There are many different ways to learn. So like I said, learn from experience, learn from structured or formal education, and then learn from others through coaching, mentoring, even receiving feedback. So it's interesting. This developing an action plan, or a development model, rather, it shows that most people learn best when they learn 70% of their information through experience, 20% from learning from others, and 10% from structured or formal education. If we've studied this and we've realized that 70% of what you need to get to your careers is learned through experience, it's kind of crazy that society tells us we need to go to school and do a 4-year degree. And that's the emphasis that they put on things. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying don't get a degree. I'm just saying assess your personal situation. Write down your goals, list what it takes to get there, and then figure out what's the best way that you can achieve those things. It might be school. Maybe a degree is what you need to do, or a certificate, I don't know, online learning. But what we know from people is that they learn best from experience. So maybe it's looking around and saying, where can I gain the experience or the knowledge or the learnings that I need to get to my goal? Within my own community, within my own reach, right? So maybe it's My girlfriend does nails really, really well. I want to be a nail technician, so I'm going to follow her page and see how she applies this gel. Or perhaps it's like this person's an influencer, or this person is very knowledgeable on this, so I'm going to emulate what I see and have discussions with them. It's just very interesting to think about that. So I don't want anyone to feel pressured or bound to what we've been taught to assume is the only way to get to our careers, which is traditional and formal education. It's important, but it's not the end-all, be-all. And lastly, like any plan, you need to follow through. And so how do you do that? How do you ensure that your plan and your actions really are coming to fruition? So the best thing to do is to share your action plan. I know it takes a lot of courage, and I know it takes a lot of vulnerability to share your plan, but the best way for you to ensure that you are accountable to your plan or you're accountable to yourself is to share it with someone else. An example that we have is like, if you're driving and the person next to you on a long trip is sleeping, isn't it going to be harder for you to stay alert and drive? As the night comes, you know, maybe you've listened to the same CD. Do people listen to CDs anymore? No, they probably are. So I'm dating myself. People don't do that anymore, but whatever, your playlist. I listen to CDs, but maybe, you know, your playlist has gone on a few times and the person next to you is snoozing. Is that going to make it easier for you to get to where you want to go? But if the person is up with you, looking at the GPS and like, yeah, this is the next turn you're preparing for, or this is the next stop that we're going to stop, get some Tim Hortons at, or whatever it may be, that makes it easier. Someone else is going along that path with you. So sharing your plan is going to be helpful. Also, follow through. Consider your image or reputation. Whether you're starting from a great space or a not so great space, because I've been in both, you have to consider that. So I've been in a role that I know I can do well, but my reputation wasn't great. Managers didn't think I was showing up. People weren't valuing my time. And it wasn't necessarily because of anything that I did, just the scenario. My previous manager was well-liked, and she left, and now this new manager doesn't know me and doesn't trust me with anything, and so I'm kind of stuck, right? So yes, I want to advance, but I got to consider what people think of me. And you have to manage that. That's why people have, people working in public relations for them. And I say every day that you show up, you're either reinforcing or redefining your career. So if you're really, really good at something and every day you show up, then you're telling people I'm continuing to be good at this, right? Or if you're really bad at something and you don't, or you have a reputation that, is not well esteemed and you're not doing anything to change that, then every day you show up, you're just reinforcing that. Or you can redefine it. Redefining it means, okay, I'm going to make a change today, no matter what space you're starting at. If you're good and you want to be better, you're still redefining. If you have a reputation that's not so great and you want to turn that on its nose, you're redefining, right? So consider your image and reputation and how that will impact your plan. And then review and update your plan regularly. You have to check in on it. You have to look at it. Sometimes I get so busy at work, my to-do list, by the time I look at it, it's been 3 weeks, and half of those things have already either resolved themselves or slipped through the cracks. But I have to make the habit of reviewing that list every single day. Update it, whatever time frame works for you. Maybe you have a 6-month check-in. Maybe you have a yearly check-in. Maybe you have monthly check-ins with whoever you share your action plan with to ensure that you're on the right path. Okay, so we've come to the next section, which is resumes and cover letters. So after you've done all of those things that we've talked about, which I know seems like a lot, but really it's foundational as you try to decide how you're going to advance in your career. Because first you weren't sure if you should stay or if you should leave at your job. Then you're like, okay, well, pause on that. What's important to me? Because that will define how I show up in my job and what I do next. So you did your assessments, your self-awareness, your strengths, your values, what makes you happy, blah, 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 blah. Then you're like, I have an idea. I made a goal. I broke my goal down I made it a SMART goal, mind you. I broke it down into smaller pieces, and now I have these action plans that are milestones. I've got the plan, I know exactly what I want to do, but now I just need the job. Now I need to get there. So this is what we're talking about now, which is the resume and the cover letter. So when we first started, Shannon read an introduction for me, and it's like, whoa. Obviously, she asked me to submit some information about myself, and I know myself, but when you hear it, you're like, wow, is that me? That sounds pretty darn good. Like, I'm impressed with me. Honest feedback, right? Same thing with your resume. And the same thing with the exercise we did at the beginning in terms of being self-aware. Your resume is your marketing tool. No one is going to stand up and promote you to anyone. This piece of paper is going to be it. And so today we're going to look at a resume, what should be on there, like the necessities, the things that are not required, and the things that are a complete no-no. We're going to look at them. And then we're going to have an example of the resume as well that we can kind of go through. So let me get my notes before I go off track. So, okay, employers sift through dozens or hundreds of resumes, like myself. I oversee recruiting at work. I see a ton of resumes all the time. And I likely do not spend more than 8 seconds on a resume. I scan it, unless I have very few. But I scan them and I gotta keep going, right? So should I keep reading or should I move on to the next? You have like 8 seconds to get that person's attention. 8 seconds, it's not very long. So that's why it's important to make sure your resume makes the right impression of you. So let's look at it. Okay, so resumes. You need to think of your resume as a carefully crafted pitch, like a marketing tool. What do you have to offer? What makes you stand out? And what relevant skills, education, and work accomplishments do you have to support the claim of who you are, right? I'm amazing at this. What examples do you have of that? So what goes into a resume? So on this side, I have listed the mandatory things that I think should be on every resume. They seem very obvious, but we're going to go into them a little bit more. So the first thing is your name and contact info. Seems like a no-brainer, yes. But let's talk about what really goes into there. Your name, perfect. Your contact info. Contact doesn't mean address. Contact means ways of getting in contact with you. Your email address is sufficient. A phone number is sufficient. I know a lot of people will put their full address. I think it's a lot of information to give away, personally. I also think that might be a tool for someone to make an assessment about me. Just because I live in Thornhill doesn't mean I'm not willing to commute to downtown or to Markham. So if there's anything that I can do to ensure that that process of assessing isn't tainted and I'm putting forth the aspects of me that I want you to consider, if it's not going to do that, I'm taking it out. You can put a city if you'd like, it's up to you, but it's not needed. How do we get a hold of you? Email address or phone if you have one. Some people just primarily use their email address, but then you have to check your email very often, so be on top of it. Another thing that I see looking at a lot of resumes is people put pictures. That's a huge no-no for me. Not because I don't like to see people's pictures. People have great headshots. We're going to do headshots today. But that's another tool that someone could use to make an assessment about me, a judgment about me. Maybe based on the way that I look, they think that I can do or not do certain things. Maybe they have a bias that they may or may not be aware of. No place for it. Put your picture on LinkedIn. Doesn't need to go on your resume. Relevant experience. Key word is relevant. Just because you've had 10 jobs doesn't mean that 10 jobs need to be on your resume. The only thing that needs to be on your resume is work that is relevant to the role that you're applying for. And if you've only had one role, that's okay. You are going to squeeze every relevant portion of that role out to highlight it. Resumes that are lengthy just for the sake of being lengthy are a waste of everyone's time. If you're applying for a role at a library, unless there's something relevant to a skill set that you've had at working at, I don't know, an aquatic store, don't put it in. Small caveat though, there are things called transitional skills, right? Transferable skills. So although those two industries may not seem expressly relevant, there may be skills that you acquired in this one role that will be helpful to the person reviewing the resume that you might want to include in the other role. So you have to be mindful. But just think, the information that I'm putting in, is it relevant? Is it going to help me get to my goal or get to the role that I'm applying for? and then your education. I would also include relevant education. Just because you're educated and you've got all of these different things doesn't mean that it's going to help you get to your role. So just think about what's relevant, what you should include for the education piece. So if you've done a certificate, if you've done a CPR course, if you've done something that's going to be relevant to the person reviewing it and say, whoa, that'd be cool to have at our organization, put that in. If you want a pageant, it's very nice to know. Perhaps that can go under like another aspect of your resume if you want to include it, but it may not be expressly relevant, like, and I don't think it's mandatory. Things that are optional. Objectives or a personal summary. A lot of people put this in their resume. I am seeking a role that, whatever, whatever. Yeah, that's great. It helps to inform the person looking at the resume what your goals are, but it's optional and it's not required. Don't write something for the sake of writing it, especially if it's not going to aid in your application. Think about what you want to say, and the only way to do that is to be self-aware. That's how you're going to do that. You can't write an objective or personal statement if you don't know what your goals are, what your drivers are, what you're good at. So don't put something there if it doesn't make sense to do it and if it's not going to strengthen your application. Your skills. A lot of people put that in. I think it's great, but it's optional. Again, you don't have to put that in. For me, I like it because I can see bullet form what someone does, but not everyone has a very long list of skill sets that they need to include. And perhaps your work experiences are more important to take up real estate on the page rather than listing skills. Many of us know how to use certain applications. Perhaps it's not important to put that on there. Perhaps you can get away with explaining it in your relevant experience, and that can take up the real estate on your resume. And then work samples. Depending on the type of role that you're applying for, a work sample might be relevant. So I had a role for a manager of communications, and this person sent in an entire booklet of things that they had done that were PR and communications projects, samples of his work. Was that relevant? I think so. Is that going to be relevant for everyone? If you say you have strong business skills, does that mean attach a business case that you wrote for something at work? Not necessarily. But this, communications manager wanted to show me that he's done campaigns, so he highlighted and included his work samples. That may be something that's optional that you think about.
So in those 8 seconds that you have, let's assume you have a job description, right, that you're trying to fulfill. So I don't know if you have a sample resume here, but we could just picture one. Like, what is in those 8 seconds that you stand for, and be like, okay, your shortlist is people, or hey, this is actually going and not going to be shortlisted.
So we do have a resume that we can review afterwards. That one is kind of put in a certain space that we can call out certain things that we should omit, so I don't think it would be helpful for this scenario. But I want to start by saying it differs by every person, right? And so depending on what your background is as a recruiter or as someone in HR, you're going to look for different things. For myself, I'll tell you that what I've experienced with other hiring managers is they want to know, does this person have the relevant experience? The days of people only looking at education are kind of going out the window because people realize that education can be taught. The other experience stuff, like you having a degree or a title, like that's important. But if you have hands-on experience, people will likely take that over, that degree that you have, with no experience. So I think highlighting the portions of your job that are very much aligned with the job description as high as you can on the resume is important. That's why I talked about the objective skills, the objective and personal summary. People usually put that at the top, like under their name, which is great. But recall, recruiters only have X amount of seconds. Do I want to read through like attention to detail? Okay, yeah, that's relevant, but I have 50 applications in front of me. So if what you put is your name and like maybe you put your experience right at the top and maybe you define it with like achievements that you have, like you start highlighting the things you did in your job, that mimic or resemble the job description, that's going to get me reading. Then I'm going to say, okay, so this person has some good experience here. What else do they got going on? Now I'm flipping to the next page. Oh, okay, they have a degree here. That's a compliment. That's a bonus. Versus, okay, this person has this skill, this degree. I don't know, my phone could ring, and my computer could bing, an email can come up, and now I'm looking all over. By the time I look back, I haven't even got to your experience to see what you're currently doing. So I think thinking about how you position it physically on the resume, what takes up real estate is going to be important. Looking at the role that you're applying for, what's going to be the call-out things that you want to include. I think another important tool is a cover letter. It's optional, not everyone includes it, but we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. That gives you more real estate and a way of introducing yourself, making yourself come alive a little bit more than just having the resume alone. Was that helpful?
Yeah.
So in your experience, do you have examples of industries that commonly use this process of analyzing or assessing which candidate to go forward with? Because I do know that other industries don't use this method, right?
Yeah, it really varies. And I think with the introduction of technology and utilizing artificial intelligence, right, AI, there are going to be varying approaches to assessing resumes. Some resumes are not even going to be scanned by humans. It's going to be an applicant tracking system that's going to go through and pull out different things. So can I say that a resume review process is specific to a certain industry? I think that's hard to identify because it varies by the individual that's reviewing it or the ATS that's reviewing it. I think the best chance that you have is just like marketing, to put the most important things as high up as you can. Think about when you're scrolling social media. The nitty-gritty details are also important, but what's going to get the person drawn in? It's going to be what's expressly relevant to what they're looking for. So as you promote something, you're thinking about how it's going to be received by the reader, not just highlighting what you have. How is it going to make sense to them? So having the job description handy, ensuring that you're pulling the aspects of there that are highlighted as must-haves or desired skills, and finding a way to pull out your experience or your background that matches that and putting it as high up as you can is going to be your best bet. I know that sounds like a vague answer, but it's the reality. Some people are using artificial intelligence more than others. Some people are looking for specific things because that's what they've grown up, or not grown up, that's what they've experienced in their career is going to be relevant to them. It really varies. Your resume is going out into the world the same way like a fashion line goes out into the world. Different things are going to appeal to different people. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on and we'll see what's next here. So resume formatting. So just to get a little bit more in-depth with it. Now that you have a basic idea of what information should be included in your resume, let's talk about the structure. So first thing, putting the right information in the right order. This is great affirmations for myself because I just said that, but now the slide is saying that as well, right? So I had thought about it before and I still believe it to be true now. What are you going to see first? Making sure it's up there. Putting the right info in the right order. Making it easy to scan. Got to get the info quickly. Bullet points are great. Utilize them. It doesn't have to be in the skills section. You could include that if you want, but as much as you can, be succinct with your information because people are scanning through these resumes or applicant tracking systems. They have different approaches, but you don't have a lot of time. Use action verbs. What's an example that I can give? So, use action verbs. So, what's a non-verb? Now I can only think of verbs. But you get what I'm saying, right? Start each bullet point or a sentence with an action verb in the past tense. So organized, crafted versus crafting, organizing, managed, past tense instead of managing, and bullet point as much as you can so it's easy to receive. Remove extra words. I talk a lot. This is something challenging for me. Even in my writing, it shows up. Review it, and where possible, omit the extra words that aren't needed. Keep it straightforward. Get to the point. Keep your resume punchy. Create consistency. So what consistency looks like in your job description is, let's use the section of work experience. So, if for the first job experience you put the name of the company and a one-line explanation about the company, because people do that, and then their title, follow that. for every subsequent job that you're listing. Some people, sometimes because you work on your resume over a period of weeks or even months, you forget that it's one whole document and you've worked on a specific part. And so now, maybe for the next role, you have just your title and maybe you have the company right aligned, and it's not making sense. You're speaking in a different tense. You're talking about what you did. I helped individuals locate whatever. But in the previous role, you were speaking like oversaw a program that assisted with, like, it's not consistent. People, like, it's like a book almost. It's not consistent. It's going to throw your reader off, and likely they're not going to spend much more time going through it. So be consistent in your approach. Little things like formatting. If you're going to bold something on one, bold it on all. Make sure your alignment is easy. And nowadays, you don't have to worry about that too much because there's so many resume templates online. And there's so many resources that you can literally just plug and play. So you've got a template, find a template that you like, and then plop in the relevant sections. You can, be creative, include different colors. Like, I think there's no wrong way to do it, except please do not put your picture in. It's not going to help you. Someone has a bias somewhere. Anything that you can do to pull that away or deter from the amount of biases is going to work in your benefit. But consistency. Any questions or comments?
Is there a font that's more like accepted to readers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, certainly. I think the traditional ones, Times New Roman, Arial, those things are going to be always winners. I think there are some fonts that are really aesthetically, attractive, but they're not great for reading. If you look at any book in Indigo, the font is not stylized. You want people to be able to absorb the information. So stick to the traditional fonts. And when I say traditional, easy to read. That's the goal. Sizing is also important. So go ahead. Were you going to ask something?
Oh, whenever you're
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, how do you feel about like someone shortening their name when applying, or even applying with a totally different name, and then you expecting someone else? My cousin applied with the name Amy. She's not Amy. And she ended up being the only person of color in the entire organization. They didn't expect her to show up, but she won them over at the interview, right? So sometimes it's necessary. So how do you feel about that?
So you're talking about putting a name that's not your name on a resume because you think it'll be more widely received or accepted, getting the interview, landing the interview, and then telling them your name is something else at the end.
Yeah, or even shortening it to something that's completely like maybe your name is 3 syllables or 2 syllables and it's just 1. And this is just your way to get your foot in the door.
I guess maybe not putting like an ethnic name on your resume.
Because a lot of people say my name's Amy, but their name is a Chinese name, right? Their traditional name may not be easy to pronounce.
Yeah, so that happens all the time, actually. And I think it depends on your approach. So there are people who have their traditional name and then their common name. Strongly recommend, whatever name you go into the interview with, stick with that name throughout your employment. So your name may be whatever. My name is Angelique, for instance, right? Angelique de Souza. That's French and Portuguese. They are absolutely not expecting to see me with dreadlocks when I come through the door. So I understand, right? They talk to me on the phone. They're still not expecting to see me show up at the interview. They're looking in the waiting room like, is there another person here, right? I get it. But the danger with sending in a resume, I'm going to use the word pretending to be someone else, is that you lose trust so easily. And when you start a new role, you want to have those easy wins as quickly and as early as you can to do what? Reinforce your brand and what people think of you and the reputation you're starting. So if you want to use a different name as a tactic or a strategy to get into the door because you feel like your experience and stats show that people are more receptive to other names, no problem. But stick with that name for as long as you're at that company. Because randomly saying afterwards, well, my name is not Amy, it's X instead, that's different than saying my legal name is something else. Like you have a legal name and a common name, that's very common. I do employment letters all the time. The name of the person I interviewed with, their legal name in brackets, their last name on the letter, the employment letter, that's fine. Just stick with the Amy is what I recommend to your cousin, because then it's going to be quite confusing. Whether or not she wins them over, they're now thinking otherwise, like this doesn't make sense. Does that sound fair? I don't want to share any personal details, but I've interviewed lots of people who have a common name and a legal name. It's very common. It happens all the time. But if they gave me a third name, that's really their name, that would be very weird. And I would be like a little concerned about who's showing up for work.
Yeah, because
I would-
you have to have your ID sometimes with some jobs.
If it's not
right?
matching the ID, I'll then be suspicious. Is this the true individual? Do they have legal status to work in this company? All of a sudden, I'm spinning in an area that I don't need to. Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to move on to cover letters. No other questions on resumes? Okay. Oh, sorry, this is the resume. My apologies. We added this in. Okay, so this is a resume of Latoya Doe. So should she call herself Amy? I don't know. It might help her get into the, to the interview room, potentially. So based on what we talked about, let's spend a few minutes and scan the resume. It's a little bit on the small side because of the scale of it here. But is there anything that we think that could be improved or adjusted by first glance of this resume?
Giving her access.
Yeah, certainly. There's an opportunity to remove that. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong. I just have to look out for myself because I'm playing chess, right? I'm not playing checkers. I want to win. I want to get to my goal. So like perhaps the address, certainly. Anything else anyone sees?
Get rid of the header, the black. I think that the style of it's a bit messy to me. There's too many words, too many,
The dates are not consistent. Like she has a month there, and then the rest of them is just the years.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it says, and if it says present, shouldn't it be closer to the top? Like if she's still in that role? And why does she have 3? This is a lot.
Okay. So if
Oh, wow. Okay.
she's hustling, right?
But if she's still presently working at those jobs, shouldn't they be closer to the top?
Right. Look at the way you're thinking about it. Because if you saw this quickly, it kind of looks like an average resume. Like it makes sense. But as you start to assess it a little more, can you think of somebody who has 50 resumes in front of them? They're out of there. And on its face, it looks like, hey, it looks great. But like, okay, this thing is gray. This thing is black. This is super small. This doesn't have a month attributed with it. When everything else does, or this is consistent, but are you still here? Are you not there? Like, what happens? Now, people do hold multiple roles at the same time. Maybe they're doing something that's volunteering, they're working on a board, perhaps they have a personal venture as well, in addition to a full-time role, a traditional 9 to 5. So it's common for people to have from whatever date until present on their resume, but make it make sense. What did we say? Let's look at those other things again. We talked about it like being consistent, making it easy for people to scan, right? Creating structure, using action words where we can dive a little bit deeper, right? Creating consistency, like those are going to be the important things that make people spend more time.
and the location, like the first one, office administrator, and then it's the title, the place, and then the location. And the second one is the title, but then the job, and then the location. Just having too many optional skills that you can put it, but maybe make it more succinct each line and less of it.
Yeah, and then what is she applying for? Does that last present, because I think it says the verb spot, does it even need to be on the resume?
Exactly. Perhaps, maybe there's some transferable skills there that would be relevant depending on the role that she's applying to. But this is the way that you want to think about your resume. You want it to be critical. You want to think critically. And now I know resumes are something that give people a lot of angst. They feel overwhelmed when they're looking at it because it's so much to include and it's a lot of work. And you're right, it is a lot of work. But once you get it done and you do it properly, you have a very good template or footprint that you can slightly adjust and alter as you start sending it out. And then applying will literally be click, apply, 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 and it'll get easier and easier. Also, the worksheet that we have where you look at the things that you're good at and your strengths, once you start to think in that way of all the things that you have to offer, you're going to see them come out in the roles that you've had, and you're going to more easily be able to position them and structure them in a way that the person reviewing the resume will find attractive. So don't underestimate the work of your self-assessment. It's going to be helpful for you to do your resume effectively. So this is a really good example. It's not a bad resume, but it's so confusing, and I don't have the time to figure it out. I'm on to the next.
I have a question. A lot of us have graduated high school years ago. Is that still necessary to put on the resume?
It depends. I don't see anything wrong with it. I think perhaps that's the highest level of education you have. And so you feel like it's relevant and important to show. I don't have any issue with it. What I do think is something that's worth thinking about is the year I graduated, because that will give you insight into my age, which I may or may not want you to know. So some people think in terms of a female between the age of 25 to 35 is in childbearing age. And I don't have time to replace this role in the next few years, so I don't want a staff of all female between this age group. Why am I going to give them extra information that they may, the recruiter, the company, be able to use to their advantage? It's totally fine for them to want to have continuity in their groups. Like, I'm not knocking them, but I don't need to give that to them. Just like I took off my city that I'm located in, I might take off the year. Right? Just things to consider.
Some jobs require the information though. So if you're like on one side and you're trying to move to another industry and they want your address, they want the years, they want those things, it's already part of the application.
If it's a part of the application and this job is a part of the goal that you're trying to achieve and it's not breaking any laws, I know there's a lot of ifs and ifs, sure. I know that when I applied to work at Old Navy, they asked for all that information. It was an application, not just a resume. So I had my resume, but I affixed it to an application which asked me specific years, and I completed it. It's what I wanted at the time. I didn't get the job at Old Navy, actually. But that was my scenario. I didn't get it. I got the one at Children's Place. It worked out, but I didn't get it. This was some years back. But, that was my story. Any other comments on this resume?
Yeah, sorry, I might have missed it when you stepped out. So all those bullet points at the top, at what point would you stop reading?
Pretty early. So
Maybe like the first 3 or 4?
yeah, especially because the bullet points are now sentences. So they're not really bullet points. That's why I would stop reading. So 9 years of customer service experience. That's a good bullet point, but it's still a sentence. So I would just put, I would take out the plus, 9 years customer service experience. However I can condense it. Able to grasp new concepts quickly. Does that need to be there? Can I find a way of describing that in the work that I've done? Utilizing my very perceptive skills, I am able to grasp new concepts quickly. That's a sentence, it's not a bullet point, right? Strong attention to detail, good bullet point, very direct. Stellar communication, I might not use the word stellar, but it adds personality, right? Maybe I could say effective, advanced, other words, tolerant, patient, and flexible to different situations. Great sentiments, but you can just say adaptable and flexible. Strong decision-making capabilities, that's a really good one. I like that one. It's a long sentence, but I think it gets to the point. PC, MS, Office suites, and social media proficiency. You can say, find a way of condensing it, like proficient in MS Office, Social media proficiency, unless it's relevant to your role, I don't think it adds value.
How many bullet points should be?
Good question.
That's what's important. Because even if you condense it, should it just be 5? Is 7 to 10 acceptable? Like how much should you put there for the person who's looking at the resume?
Again, it really depends. How much information do you have that you're trying to pack into your resume? So for this resume, for instance, it's a page and a quarter. There's a lot of real estate here. So if this person wants to add skills because they don't have anything else to add, sure. They want to add something else, like you've got real estate here. But if your resume is 2.5, 3 pages long, which is not bad, if you have this stuff to put on it, fine. Don't make it overbearing. And also, it's not just the bullet points. Think about the placement. Is that the most important information they need to read right up front? Is 9 years of customer service the most important thing that they need to read on your resume? Perhaps it is if you're applying for a customer service role. Maybe. But social media proficiency, does that need to be a bullet point? Like, you have to think about the space you have, the relevancy of what you're putting. But if you want a number, like, I don't think you should have more than 6 to 9 bullet points. Or maybe you don't use them at all in the skills area. It's not an exact science, as we talked about before, but you've got one shot to highlight yourself, promote and market yourself to the individual for the role. So do what you can to make the best impression that you can. Consider everything, review everything. Also, test it out with somebody that you trust. Maybe someone who has a role like what you're applying for. Maybe someone that you respect and appreciate their feedback. Ask them to take a quick look at it. Okay. So cover letters. Imagine you come across a job posting that doesn't require a cover letter. Wouldn't that be great? Because you feel like you've got to write all this stuff about yourself. And most jobs don't require it, but a lot of jobs expect it. A cover letter is an opportunity for you to highlight the things in your resume that didn't make the cut. So all the other great things about you that you don't want to take up valuable real estate on that resume, you're going to put in your cover letter. And the cover letter is a place where you can, for lack of a better expression, go wild. Put all the interesting, amazing things about yourself outside of the mandatory things that people need to know to get to that point. So the resume is the hook, like on social media, that's the hook. The cover letter is going to allow you to expand more. That's like, I don't want to say the meat, but that will give you more context. So we're going to look at the cover letter and what to include. Don't underestimate the power of a well-written cover letter to catch an employer's attention, communicate your value, and make you stand out from the competition. So while most job seekers have a general idea of what a cover letter is, there's still a lot of confusion about what its purpose is and how it should differ from the resume. So, a resume and cover letter are 2 distinct but complementary documents. While a resume gives employers data about your skills, your education, and accomplishments in employment history, and so on, your cover letter tells the employer how to interpret or explain what those things mean, what those likes, dislikes, passions, experience mean. Okay, so your cover letter should be roughly 3 to 4 paragraphs, nothing more than that. We don't need a full page. And a paragraph is 4 sentences by definition. There are long paragraphs, but typically it's 4 sentences. So 3 segments of 4 sentences. 3 times 4 is 12 sentences is what your cover letter should be. You should be able to talk about who you are and what you have to offer. So you're going to have a greeting section, right? You're going to say, thanks so much for taking the time. You're going to kind of give some contact information about you. Then you're going to get into the meat. And then you're going to talk about your closing signature. So I have a sample cover letter here of an introduction. We're going to go through, we have contact information and greeting, body, the meat of it, and then closing and signature. And we're going to go through an example of each. So I'm writing to you to express my interest in the video producer role, which I recently saw posted on the Indeed job board, right? Bad is a harsh word, but it's not a great opening. Here's a better example. I believe in the power of a well-told story to connect an audience and drive action. That's why I've dedicated the last 5 years to finding and producing human stories behind top products and brands, and why I hope to continue my journey by doing so as this team's video producer. Like, it comes alive, right? It's totally different. Same sentiments, but this one is like a lot more engaging. So the resume hooked me. Now I read the cover letter, because I didn't say this. At least when I get a resume. A cover letter, I don't have time. I want to see the resume first. What do they actually do? Wow, okay, let me read this cover letter. Now I'm looking at it, right? So this is where I'm going to learn a little bit more. It's just an example. Thoughts on this? Make sense?
My cover letter definitely has the bad.
That's the bad. Well, I think bad is a harsh word, but this is what we're like taught to write. And my cover letter traditionally had this as well. It's been a while since I applied for a new job, but my cover letter looked very similar to this. So I think this is an example of what a better intro looks like. I skipped this. Body. So I'm an enthusiastic and ambitious self-starter who knows how to get things done. I'm always thinking about new ways to improve myself, my team, and my company. It sounds pretty good to me. Again, we're not going to say it's bad, but it sounds pretty good to me. But here's a better example. I'm a results-driven starter. As a customer service manager, I spearheaded an initiative to interview customers and better understand their pain points. The insights gleaner from this initiative led to changes that resulted in X% of increase in customer satisfaction rates. So again, we're going from good to great here. I'm not going to say bad. This really talks more about what you've done. So whoa, okay. On your resume, you may have had one line about how you're a customer service manager, but now you're really telling me what you've done. And this may also come straight out of your resume too. Like perhaps you're going to just take a bullet point and expand more on it in your cover letter. So the conclusion. So from my resume and the experiences I've listed, I'm confident that I would excel in this role and be a positive contributor to your team. Thank you for your time and consideration. I hope to hear from you soon. Again, not terrible. That's good, but we're going to take it to great. While my project management skills and experience make me the best person for the job, my collaborative leadership style and can-do attitude make me the best person for the team. Thank you for your time and consideration. I'd love to continue the conversation over a phone call or coffee. Do we think that this is a better example?
Coffee? Maybe.
Red herring. This one's a trick. Yeah, I don't think that's better. Do you guys think that one was better?
I don't know.
So this one gets a little personal. This one starts to be a little presumptuous. This is not something that I would think is compelling. I actually prefer the top. But I wanted to test your knowledge without saying I'm testing your knowledge, right? You have to think things through. What makes sense for the audience that you're engaging with? What makes sense for the medium that you're using to engage with? This is on paper. This is someone you've never met. This might be a little bit too forward. This might be a little bit too direct. This is making assumptions. I might be the best person for the job, the best person for the team. It's a little bit forward. I think the above is just fine. Okay, we've done a lot today. We've talked. We've shared a lot of information. And if I had to summarize the things that you need to do to advance your career, these would be the buckets that I would put them in. You really need to consider, is it time for a change? Whether you're in a role, about to look for a new role, or trying to advance to a completely different field, there are considerations that you need to have. In order to inform the decisions you make, you need to be self-aware. Doing the assessments, doing the self-work and understanding what your drivers are, what are the areas that you're really good in. And then once you have an idea and you start to think about how to put those into action, you're going to drive your career. And under that, that means setting goals, making sure that they're SMART goals, breaking down those goals into actionable steps that become your milestones, and then ensuring that you meet them by sharing those goals and holding yourself accountable. So we encourage you to apply the skills and knowledge acquired to enhance your professional growth. Keep in mind that advancing your career is a continual journey that demands perseverance and flexibility. Make use of the strategies learned today to confidently navigate your career path. Life happens. There is no guaranteed way to do things, but that's also the beauty of life. So lean into the experience that you have, lean into the desires that you have, do what you can to ensure that you're further bolstering yourself and preparing yourself to get to the pathways that you've identified, and it will come together for you. I hope that this has been helpful. And so thank you, everyone, for your time.